"He's not coming, ma'am. And he told me to make sure you understood that." The ranch hand said it flat like he was reporting the weather. Then he climbed back onto his horse and left Evelyn Carter standing beside a locked gate with a wedding trunk at her feet and no way home. 3 months of letters, 1,000 miles of hope, and one folded note calling it all a mistake. If you're watching this, do me a favor, subscribe to the channel, stay with me all the way to the end of this story, and drop the name of the city you're watching from in the comments so I can see just how far Evelyn's story has traveled tonight. Read it again. Evelyn heard her own voice come out cracked, and she hated it. She was talking to a man who was already 15 feet up the trail, already turning his horse, already done with her. "Ma'am, I read it once. That's all Mr. Whitaker paid me to do." "Then hand me the letter and I'll read it myself." He tossed it. Didn't ride back, didn't lean down, just flicked the folded paper into the dirt near her feet like he was feeding a dog. Evelyn looked at it lying there in the dust, and for one long second, she refused to bend down and pick it up. Bending down felt like agreeing to something. "You're just going to leave me here. I'm just doing what I was told." There's a difference between what you're told and what's right. The man stopped, finally. He turned in the saddle and looked back at her, and for the first time, there was something in his face that wasn't boredom. It might have been shame. It might have just been discomfort. Either way, it didn't change anything. "Lady, I got a family in town. I got mouths to feed. Whitaker signs my wages. You want me to lose everything I got standing up for a woman I met 4 minutes ago? I want you to remember my face." "Why's that?" "So that when someone asks you someday whether you left a woman to die at a gate in the middle of nowhere, you'll have to look them in the eye and say yes." He held her stare a moment longer. Then he clicked his tongue, and the horse carried him off down the trail, and the dust rose up behind him and swallowed the sound of the hooves until there was nothing left but the wind and the heat. And Evelyn Carter, 24 years old, alone. She bent down. She picked up the letter. She read it herself. "Miss Carter, I have reconsidered. The arrangement is canceled. Do not come looking for me." That was all. 6 lines worth of a life undone in 3 sentences. "Reconsidered," she said out loud to no one. 3 months of letters, and the word he chooses is reconsidered. She read it a second time because part of her still believed the words might rearrange themselves into something survivable. They didn't. She read it a third time looking for a signature that felt like the man she'd been writing to. The Thomas Whitaker in those letters had written about the way the light came over his fields in the morning. He'd written that he wanted a partner, not a servant. He'd written in the very last letter, "I have waited my whole life to stop being alone, and I believe you may be the reason my waiting ends. And now, do not come looking for me." "Something's wrong," she whispered. She didn't know yet how right she was. She sat down on the trunk because her legs would no longer hold her, and she let herself do the math because Evelyn Carter had always been a woman who did the math. She had $11. She had a trunk too heavy to carry. She had a wedding dress she would never wear folded on top of clothes she'd mended a dozen times. The nearest town was 15 miles east. She knew that because she'd counted the mile markers on the way in back when counting them had felt like counting down to the best day of her life. 15 miles. On foot, in this heat, before dark. "You can't make it," she said to herself. "So you'd better figure out something you can do." That was the voice she'd learned from her mother, and it was the only inheritance her mother had left her. When the fever took both her parents, in the same winter, that voice was what got Evelyn out of bed each morning. You can't fix what's done, so figure out what you can do. She'd said it to herself standing over 2 fresh graves. She'd said it selling the last of her mother's things to pay the last of her father's debts. She'd said it the night she answered the advertisement in the marriage paper. Hands shaking, thinking this is either the bravest thing I've ever done or the stupidest. She hadn't known it could be both. "Get up," she said now. "Get up, Evelyn." She got up. And that was when she heard the hoofbeats again. Her heart did something complicated. A leap of hope she hated herself for, because the first thing she thought was, he came back. Thomas came back. It was a mistake. And right behind that thought came the fear, because a woman alone in open country hearing a rider approach has learned through 1,000 years of other women's stories that hope is not the safe bet. She turned toward the sound. She squared her shoulders. She did not let her hand shake though it wanted to. The rider came out of the far end of the trail, not from the direction the ranch hand had gone, but from the north, from the neighboring land. A tall man on a good horse, unhurried, the kind of unhurried that comes from a man who's used to open space and doesn't feel the need to rush through it. He slowed when he saw her. He slowed the way you slow when you come across something that doesn't make sense. A trunk, a woman, a locked gate, a letter in her hand. He stopped a respectful distance off. Not close. He seemed to understand without being told that close was the wrong thing to be right now. "Afternoon," he said. Evelyn said nothing. "You waiting on somebody?" "I was." The man looked at the gate. He looked at the empty ranch house beyond it, shuttered and still. He looked at the trunk and the dress folded on top, and then at the letter in her hand, and Evelyn watched him put it together piece by piece, the way you watch a man read a hand of cards, and slowly realize how bad it is. "You the woman Whitaker sent for," he said. It wasn't a question anymore. I was supposed to be his wife. The man was quiet a moment. Then, was. He reconsidered. "She said the word the way you'd hold up something rotten." "That's the word he used." Something moved across the man's face, and it wasn't pity, which was the thing Evelyn was braced against. The thing she'd have refused. It was anger, cold and quiet, and aimed somewhere past her, at the gate, at the house, at the man who'd built both. "He left you standing here," the man said. "He had someone else do it. He didn't even come himself." "Course he didn't." "You know him. Everybody out here knows everybody." The man's jaw tightened. "I know enough." Evelyn studied him. She'd been studying men her whole life. It was a survival skill for a woman alone, learning to read a stranger fast, learning to know in the first 30 seconds whether to stand or run. And this man was giving her something she couldn't quite name. He hadn't dismounted. He hadn't come closer. He was keeping his distance on purpose, and somehow that told her more about him than anything he could have said. "What's your name?" she asked. "Caleb Dawson. I run the spread just north of here." He nodded toward the land behind him. "We're neighbors near as makes no difference. Or we would have been if things had gone how they were supposed to. They didn't. No, I can see that." A silence stretched between them. Evelyn became aware all at once of how tired she was, tired in her bones, tired in a way that had been building for 1,000 miles and had just now, standing at this gate, caught all the way up to her. "Well, Mr. Dawson," she said, keeping her voice level. "You found me. That's about all there is to find." "Where you headed?" "Town. I'll find work." "On foot?" "If I have to." "It's 15 miles. I counted. He almost smiled at that. Almost. "It's 15 miles and it'll be dark before you're halfway, and the road past the creek." He stopped himself, started again more carefully. "It's not a road a woman ought to walk alone after dark. I'm not saying that to scare you. I'm saying it because it's true, and because I'd rather you be scared and safe than brave and sorry." Evelyn felt the fear touch her again cold, but she didn't let it into her voice. "And what's your suggestion?" He hesitated. She watched him choose his words like a man walking across ice. "I got a spare room, a real one with a door that locks from the inside and a key I'll hand you and never ask back. I got food and a roof and no expectations attached to any of it." He paused. "You can stay till you figure out your next move. That's the whole offer. There's nothing under it." And there it was, the moment Evelyn had been dreading since the letter hit the dust, because she'd trusted a man's written promises once. She'd crossed a country on the strength of a stranger's kind words. And look where those kind words had left her, at a gate in the dust, with $11 and a dress she'd never wear. "Why?" she said, and her voice came out harder than she meant it. "Why would you do that? You don't know me. I could be anyone. I could be a liar. I could be a thief. You've known me 4 minutes. Caleb Dawson looked at her for a long moment. Same thing that ranch hand asked himself, he said finally. Whether it's worth the trouble to do right by a stranger. And what's your answer? My answer's that I already watched one man ride off from you today. I'm not going to be the second. Evelyn didn't say anything. She couldn't for a second. Because it was the exact right thing to say, and the exact right thing was the one thing she had no defense against. For one night, she said at last. One night, and I'll be gone in the morning, and I'll owe you the cost of the meal, and I'll pay it back the first chance I get. You won't owe me anything. I pay my debts, Mr. Dawson. He looked at her. Really look the way you look at someone when you've just revised your whole opinion of them upward. All right, he said. One night. And you don't owe me anything. But I can see there's no talking you out of thinking you do, so we'll argue about it later. He swung down off the horse. And here, this was the thing Evelyn would remember for the rest of her life. The small thing that told her everything he didn't come to her. He went to the trunk. He kept the whole width of the trunk between them the entire time, and he lifted it. And he never once let his eyes do the thing. Men's eyes did, the sizing up, the taking stock. Trunk's heavier than it looks, he grunted. That's the sewing machine. You brought a sewing machine across the country. I brought a way to make a living across the country. Evelyn lifted her chin. The dress was hope. The machine was the plan. I've learned to keep both, but only trust the one that works when hope doesn't. Caleb stopped the trunk half lifted and looked at her over the top of it. Miss Carter, he said, I think you're going to be just fine out here. I think I'm going to have to be. They didn't talk much on the ride. She sat behind him on the horse with as much space between them as the animal's back allowed, one hand gripping the edge of the saddle blanket, and she watched the land go by and tried not to think about the fact that she was trusting a second stranger on the same day the first one had thrown her away. You can't fix what's done, said her mother's voice. Figure out what you can do. What she could do was watch. So she watched. She noted the way Caleb Dawson held the reins loose, never yanking the horse, responding to shifts of weight more than to the bit. She noted that he pointed things out along the way, not to impress her. Just habit a man used to talking to livestock and himself. Creek's down there, he said. Runs most of the year. Goes dry in August if we're unlucky. And when it's dry, then you haul water and you pray and you learn real quick what you're made of. A pause. You look like you already learned that part. Some of it. The learning never seems to stop. No, Caleb said quietly. It doesn't. They crested a low rise, and his land opened up in front of them, and Evelyn understood immediately that whatever Thomas Whitaker's letters had promised, this was not it. This was smaller. This was worn. This was a house that had been built by hand and repaired by the same hands a barn that leaned a degree off. True, a garden fighting a losing war against the sun. And Evelyn, who had spent 3 months imagining a mansion, felt something she did not expect. She felt relief, because everything in front of her was honest. Nothing was pretending to be more than it was. And after Thomas Whitaker's letters, all that beautiful language wrapped around a lie, honest, looked like the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. It's not much, Caleb said, and she heard something guarded in it, a man bracing to be judged. No, Evelyn said. It's real. That's better. He glanced back at her, surprised, and didn't answer. But she saw his shoulders come down an inch. Inside the house, told a story Caleb Dawson clearly didn't mean to tell. It told the story of a man who lived alone and had for a long time. One chair pulled up to a table built for 4. One cup washed and set to dry. A woman's touches here and there, curtains, a quilt, a set of good dishes, all of it gone dusty and untouched, preserved like a room in a house where something had stopped. Evelyn saw it. She didn't say anything, but she saw it. Room's back here, Caleb said, carrying the trunk down a short hall. He set it down inside a small, clean bedroom, The larger of the two she'd realized later, the one that had clearly been his. "There's the lock. Key's in it. Like I said, you keep it." "This is your room." He stopped. "What makes you say that?" "The other one's smaller, and there's tools stored in it. This one's got the bigger window and the better bed." She met his eyes. "You're giving me your own room." Caleb Dawson looked for a moment like a man caught. "You're a guest," he said, "not a burden. Guests get the good room." "I've been a burden to a lot of people this year, Mr. Dawson. I know the difference in how it feels to be treated." "Well," he cleared his throat, "you're not one here." And he left the room before she could say anything else. And Evelyn stood there in a stranger's bedroom, holding a key she hadn't asked for, and for the first time since the gate. For the first time in longer than that, she felt the pressure behind her eyes that meant tears were coming. She did not let them. Figure out what you can do. What she could do was make supper. So she found the kitchen, and she found what there was to find in it, and she went to work. He came in an hour later, having done whatever a man does with a horse and a barn at the end of a day, and he stopped in the kitchen doorway like he'd walked into the wrong house. "You cooked. You had flour and beans and a little salt pork and a garden with 3 things worth picking in it," Evelyn said, not turning around. "I cooked. You didn't have to." "I know I didn't have to." She set a plate down at the place where the single chair sat. "Sit. It's not much, but it's hot. And there's enough." Caleb sat slowly, like the chair might be a trap. He looked at the plate. He looked at her standing by the stove. "You're not eating." "There's one chair. There's—" He stood up, crossed the room, and dragged a second chair out from against the wall, one she hadn't touched because it had clearly not been sat in for a long time. He set it across from his. "There's 2. Sit down and eat with me. I'm not eating while a woman stands in the corner like the hired help. That's not how it works in this house." Evelyn hesitated. "Please," Caleb said. And there was something under the word, not command, not charity, something more like loneliness admitting itself. "It's been a long time since there was anybody at that table. I'd take it kindly." She sat. They ate. And for a while there was only the sound of forks and the wind at the window. And then Caleb set his down and said quietly, "This is the best meal I've had in 3 years. It's beans, Mr. Dawson. It's beans somebody made for me. That's the part that's different." Evelyn looked at him, and she understood in that moment that the two of them were the same broken thing, wearing 2 different faces. She'd been thrown away. He'd been left too. She didn't know how, not yet, but she could read it on him plain as she could read it on herself. 2 people who'd each learned that the people they counted on could vanish. 2 people sitting at a table that had known better and worse days. "Who set out these dishes?" she asked gently. "Before me. Whose curtains are those?" Caleb was quiet for a long moment, long enough that she thought he wouldn't answer. "My wife's," he said finally. "Sarah's. She passed. 3 winters back. The fever came through, and it took her. And it didn't take me. And I never did figure out why it made that choice. I'm sorry. You didn't do it. I know I didn't do it. I'm still sorry. Both things can be true." She heard her own words come back at her the same shape as his had been at the gate, and she saw him hear it too. "Yeah," he said softly. "Both things can be true." They finished the meal in a silence that had changed its character. No longer the silence of 2 strangers, but the silence of 2 people who'd each just handed the other something true, and were letting it sit there between them, warm on the table, where a dead woman's dishes had gone dusty for 3 years. That night, Evelyn locked the door with the key he'd given her. Then she sat on the bed and unlocked it again. Not because she trusted him completely. She'd trusted completely once, and it had nearly killed her. But because locking it felt like an insult to the only person who'd treated her like a human being all day, and she wasn't willing to pay him that insult. She left it unlocked, and she lay down, and she thought, this is a mistake, or it isn't. and there's no way to know which tonight. So sleep, Evelyn. Just sleep. But she didn't sleep, not right away, because something was gnawing at her, and it took her half the night to name it, and when she named it, she sat straight up in the dark. The letter. Do not come looking for me. She got up. She lit the lamp. She dug the letter out of the trunk, and she read it a fourth time, and now, with her mind clearer and the shock worn off, she saw what she'd been too broken to see at the gate. The handwriting was wrong. She had 3 months of Thomas Whitaker's letters folded in the bottom of that trunk. She knew his hand the way you know a voice. He wrote his T's with a long crossing stroke. He looped his Y's. He pressed hard on the downstrokes so the paper had little ridges you could feel with your thumb. This letter, the one that had ended her whole life at a gate, was written in a careful, cramped, entirely different hand. Someone had written it for him, or Evelyn's blood went cold, or someone had written it and signed his name. She was still sitting there when the knock came at the door, soft at the very edge of dawn. "Miss Carter, you up? I heard you moving." She opened the door. Caleb stood there with a lamp of his own, already dressed, already looking like a man who'd been up an hour. "You didn't sleep," he said. "No." "Bad dreams. Bad handwriting." She held out the letter, and beside it, one of the letters from the trunk. "Look at these. Look at them side by side, and tell me what you see." Caleb took them. He was quiet, holding one lamp between the 2 pages, his eyes going back and forth. "They're not the same hand," he said slowly. "No, they're not. This one," he lifted the cancellation note. "This one I've seen before." His voice changed. Went careful, went low. "Miss Carter, I've seen this handwriting before. This is—" He stopped. "This is what?" Evelyn said. "Whose is it?" Caleb Dawson looked up from the letter, and the expression on his face was one she'd remember a long time, a man realizing that the thing he'd been half ignoring for a year had just turned around and looked him back in the eye. "Get dressed," he said. "There's something I need to show you, and a question I need to ask that's going to sound crazy until I explain it." "What question?" "When's the last time," Caleb said, "that you actually saw Thomas Whitaker with your own 2 eyes? Not a letter. Not a note passed by a ranch hand. Him. In the flesh." Evelyn opened her mouth to answer, and realized she never had. 3 months of letters, 1,000 miles of hope, a wedding dress packed in a trunk, and she had never not once laid eyes on the man she'd crossed a country to marry. "I never saw him at all," she whispered. "No," Caleb said grimly, folding the 2 letters together and handing them back to her. "I didn't think you had, and I'm starting to think there's a reason for that, a real ugly one." He turned toward the door, then stopped, and looked back at her with something in his face that was half apology and half warning. "Miss Carter, you came out here thinking a man broke a promise to you. That's bad enough. But I don't think that's what happened. I think what happened is worse, and I think you walked right into the middle of it without knowing there was a middle to walk into. Tell me." "Not here. Not till I show you." He picked up his hat. "You want the truth of what you got yourself into? It's an hour's ride from here, and we ought to go before the sun's all the way up." Evelyn stood in the doorway of a dead woman's bedroom, holding 2 letters written in 2 different hands, and made the second decision of her life, to trust Caleb Dawson. "Then let me get my boots," she said. The ride out took the better part of an hour, and Caleb Dawson didn't say a word for the first 40 minutes of it. Evelyn let him have his silence. She'd learned in one night that this was a man who chewed on his words before he spoke them, and that whatever he was about to show her was costing him something to show. She could see it in the set of his shoulders. She could see it in the way his jaw kept working, like he was rehearsing a sentence he didn't want to have to say out loud. "You can tell me now," she finally said. "Whatever it is, I'd rather hear it from your mouth than get hit with it cold." "I know. That's what I'm trying to figure out. How to say it without it sounding like the ravings of a man who's got a grudge." "You've got a grudge against Thomas Whitaker. I've got a grudge against something. I'm just not sure Whitaker's the right name to hang it on anymore." He slowed the horse. That's the part I've been sitting on for a year, and your letter just turned it from a bad feeling into something I can hold in my hand. Then hold it up. Let me see it too. Caleb reined in at the top of a rise, and he pointed down at the spread below. The same abandoned ranch, the same locked gate, the shuttered house Evelyn had stood in front of the day before, while a stranger tossed a letter into the dust at her feet. "That's Whitaker's place," he said. "I know, I've seen it. From the wrong side of the gate." "When's the last time you think anybody lived in it?" Evelyn looked, and now that she was looking with different eyes, looking the way Caleb was clearly telling her to look, she saw it. The house wasn't just shuttered, it was dead. The garden was gone to seed, and had been for a long time. The corral was empty, and the gate to it hung open on a broken hinge. There were no animals. There was no smoke. There was no laundry, no woodpile freshly split, no single sign that a living soul had drawn breath in that house in a year. "Nobody's lived there in a long while," she said slowly. "Not since last spring, maybe longer." Caleb's voice was flat and careful. "So here's my question, Miss Carter, and I want you to really sit with it. If nobody's lived in that house in over a year who's been writing you letters from it for 3 months..." The bottom dropped out of Evelyn's stomach. "That's not possible," she said. "The letters had a return address. This address. I sent my replies here. He got them. He answered them. He wrote back about things I'd said. So he read them. So he was..." "Somebody read them," Caleb said. "Somebody answered them. I'm just telling you, it wasn't a man living in that house because no man's lived in that house since before you ever put pen to paper." Evelyn's hands had gone cold on the saddle blanket. "Then where is he? Where's the real Thomas Whitaker?" "That," Caleb said, "is the question I've been trying to get a straight answer to for a year, and every time I ask it, I get told to mind my own business by men who don't usually care one way or the other what I do." "Which men?" "I'll get to that. There's one more thing I need you to see first, and then you'll understand why I've been losing sleep over a neighbor I barely knew."
Kamato.
He took her another 20 minutes north and west off any trail she'd have recognized to a low fenced-off square of ground with a scatter of stone markers standing crooked in it. A little burying ground, the kind ranch families kept for their own, the kind that told you how long a family had been on a piece of land by how many stones stood in it. Caleb dismounted. He walked her to a marker near the back, and he stood over it with his hat in his hands. "Read it," he said. Evelyn read it. "Thomas Whitaker, 1841 to 1883, at rest." She read it again. She read it a third time, because that was apparently the number of times she needed to read a thing before her mind would let it be true. Then she looked up at Caleb, and her voice when it came was barely there. 1883. Died over a year ago. Last winter, but one. Caleb's face was grim. "I helped dig this hole myself, Miss Carter. I stood right where you're standing, and I watched them lower him down. Fever, they said. Same one. That same one that's taken more than its share out here. I never knew him well. But I knew him well enough to be a pallbearer, and I know a dead man doesn't write letters." Evelyn stood at the foot of a grave belonging to a man she'd crossed a country to marry, a man who had been in the ground for over a year before she ever wrote him a single word. "I wrote to a dead man," she said. "For 3 months I wrote to a dead man." "No," Caleb said. "You wrote to whoever's using a dead man's name, and that's a different, meaner thing entirely. Why?" Her voice cracked, and she didn't care. Why would somebody do that? Why would somebody keep a dead man's name alive just to send for a bride and then throw her away at a gate? What's the point? What did they get? They got you out here. For what? Caleb turned his hat in his hands, and when he spoke, his voice had gone quiet and hard as flint. "I don't know yet, but I know it's not the first time. And I know the ranch hand who handed you that note. I know who pays his wages, and it isn't a ghost." "Then who?" "Fella name of Harlan Booth. Calls himself a land agent. Showed up in this county about 2 years back and started buying up spreads whose owners had a run of bad luck." He looked her dead in the eye. "Whitaker died with no wife, no children, no will anybody could find, and a whole lot of good land. And a piece of land like that with no clear owner. A man like Booth can do a lot with the year it takes the law to sort out who it belongs to, especially if there's nobody left alive to say different. Evelyn's mind was moving fast now, faster than the shock the way it always did once the first blow landed, and she started doing the math on the second. "But I'm not a piece of land," she said. "I'm not property to be bought. Why send for me? A bride can't inherit a ranch she was never married into. So what am I to Harlan Booth? What use is a bride who was never a bride?" Caleb Dawson looked at her for a long moment, and something crossed his face that scared her worse than the grave had. "That," he said slowly, "is the question I hadn't thought to ask. Because you're right, a dead man can't marry you, so sending for you doesn't get Booth the land." He frowned. "Unless getting the land was never the reason he sent for you." "Then what was—" "I don't know, but I aim to find out. And I don't like the shape of it, because there's only one kind of reason a man goes to the trouble and expense of luring a woman across the whole country under a dead man's name, and then make sure she arrives with nobody expecting her and no way to get home." He didn't finish it. He didn't have to. Evelyn finished it herself in the cold quiet of her own head, standing over a stranger's grave. He wanted a woman nobody would come looking for. "We should go," she said, and her voice was steady, because she made it steady, because the alternative was to not be steady, and she couldn't afford that. "If a man went to all that trouble to get me out here alone, then me being not alone is the one thing that ruins his plan. So I ought to be seen with you, publicly, as soon as possible." Caleb looked at her with open surprise. "You think fast." "I think fast because I've had a hard life, Mr. Dawson. Fast is the only thing that kept me in it." She turned back toward the horse. "Take me to town, the one you said I shouldn't walk to alone. I want to be seen there walking with somebody buying supplies existing where people can see me exist. Because the moment I'm a woman, the whole town knows about I stop being a woman who can just quietly disappear. That's—" Caleb shook his head, half admiring, half worried. "That's smart, and it's dangerous. Because the second Booth knows you didn't disappear, the second he knows you're standing in the middle of town, telling people you were sent for by a man who's been dead a year, you become a problem he has to solve. I'm already a problem he has to solve. I'd just rather be the kind he can't solve quietly." Town was a single dusty street with a general store, a stage office, a saloon, a church that doubled as a schoolhouse, and a low building with a shingle that said County Land and Claims. Evelyn read that shingle twice as they rode in and filed it away. Caleb helped her down off the horse in front of the general store, helped her down where the whole street could see it. A stranger woman and a local rancher, the beginning of a story that would be told at 3 supper tables before nightfall. That was the point. The whispers started before her boots touched the boardwalk. "That's her. That's the bride. The one Whitaker sent for. Whitaker's dead, you fool." "Then who?" "Somebody sent for her. Look at that trunk of hers, still out at the gate. Everybody's seen it." Evelyn walked straight into the general store with her chin up and Caleb behind her, and she set her $11 on the counter and asked the storekeeper for flour, salt, coffee, and thread in a clear voice that carried, and she made sure to say her name. "Evelyn Carter," she said. "From Ohio. I came out here to marry Thomas Whitaker." She let that land. She watched the storekeeper's face do the thing faces do when you say the name of a dead man, like you expect him to walk in. "I've just this morning learned that Mr. Whitaker's been in the ground over a year. Which raises an interesting question about who's been signing his name to letters, wouldn't you say?" The store went quiet. "Ma'am?" the storekeeper said carefully, glancing at the door. I'd mind how loud I said that if I were you." "Why's that?" "Because," said a new voice from the doorway, "it's a serious thing to accuse folks of forgery, and a stranger ought to be careful throwing serious accusations around a town she just rode into." Evelyn turned. The man in the doorway was handsome, in a polished, careful way, dressed a cut better than anyone else on the street with a smile that reached exactly as far as his cheeks and no farther. He took off his hat to her like a gentleman. Everything about him said reasonable, respectable, harmless. And every instinct Evelyn had honed over a lifetime of reading strangers fast screamed at her that this was the most dangerous man she'd met yet. "Harlan Booth," Caleb said flatly behind her. "Speak of the devil." "Dawson." Booth's smile stayed put. "Didn't expect to see you playing escort. Then again, you always did have a soft spot for strays." He turned that smile on Evelyn. "Miss Carter, is it? I'm terribly sorry for the confusion you've suffered. Truly. Some clerk in the land office must have kept old Whitaker's correspondence going. You know how these things get muddled after a death. Nobody thinks to close the accounts. A dreadful clerical mistake. You have my sincere apology on behalf of the county." It was smooth. It was so smooth that Evelyn almost believed it. For half a second, almost let herself grab the easy explanation, the way a drowning woman grabs anything that floats. Then she looked at his eyes, and his eyes weren't apologizing. His eyes were measuring her for a coffin. "A clerical mistake," she repeated. "I'm afraid so. A clerical mistake that wrote me 60 pages of letters over 3 months. That knew my mother died of fever, and asked kindly whether I found the coming winter frightening on account of it. That remembered which of my sisters I was closest to." Evelyn tilted her head. "That's a very personal clerk, Mr. Booth. That's a clerk who read every word I sent and wrote back like he'd known me his whole life. Do all your clerks pour their hearts into the correspondence of dead men?" Booth's smile flickered. Just once, just for a fraction of a second. But Evelyn was watching for it, and she caught it, and she knew she'd landed a blow he hadn't expected to take. "You have a vivid imagination, Miss Carter." "I have a very good memory, Mr. Booth. It served me better than imagination ever did." "Well..." Booth put his hat back on. "I'd hate to see a good memory get a woman into trouble she can't get out of. It's a hard country out here, lonely. Things happen to folks who don't have people watching out for them." He nodded to Caleb. "Lucky for Miss Carter, she's found herself a protector. For now." And he walked out. Evelyn let out a breath she hadn't known she was holding. "He threatened me," she said quietly, "in front of witnesses, and made it sound like concern." "That's Booth," Caleb said grimly. "That's exactly Booth. He'll smile at you while he digs the hole." He looked at her. "You rattled him, though. I've watched that man for a year, and I've never seen him blink. You made him blink." "The letters," Evelyn said. "That's what rattled him. He didn't write them. His face said he didn't write them. Somebody else wrote those letters. Somebody who knew me, Caleb. Somebody who read every word I sent and cared enough to answer it right." Her voice caught. "And that means somewhere in this there's a person who spent 3 months being kind to me on paper. And I need to know if the kindness was real or if it was just the sharpest part of the trap." She got her answer sooner than she wanted it, and it came from the last direction she'd have looked. They were loading the supplies onto the horse when a girl came running up the street, no more than 16 thin, plainly dressed out of breath, with the frightened, furtive look of someone doing a thing they'd be punished for. "Miss Carter," the girl said. "You're Miss Carter, the one from Ohio." "I am. Who are you?" The girl looked over her shoulder back down the street toward the land office, then thrust a folded paper into Evelyn's hands. "I can't stay. I can't be seen. Please, just please read it when you're somewhere safe. And please don't hate me. I didn't know it would go this far. I swear before God I didn't know." Didn't know what wait. But the girl was already gone, ducking between 2 buildings, vanishing the way frightened people vanish. Evelyn unfolded the paper right there. She couldn't have waited if her life depended on it. And she knew the handwriting the instant she saw it. Long crossing strokes on the T's. Looped-wise. That hard press on the downstrokes that left little ridges you could feel with your thumb. It was the handwriting from her letters. The kind ones. The ones she'd fallen a little in love with. Thomas Whitaker's handwriting, except Thomas Whitaker was a year in the ground, so it had never been his at all. The note said, "Miss Carter, my name is Ruth. I wrote the letters. All of them. He made me do it. I want you to know that, though I know it doesn't fix anything. He found my letters, and he saw I could write like a man when I wanted to, and he made me answer the marriage papers in Whitaker's name. But I want you to know the words were mine. When I asked about your mother, that was me. When I said I didn't want you to be alone anymore, that was me, and I meant it. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. He's going to hurt you if you stay. You are not the first. Please, the others didn't have anyone. You have the Dawson man. Trust him. And run. Evelyn's hand shook so hard she nearly dropped it. Caleb. Her voice came out strange. Caleb read this. He read it. She watched his face change from confusion to horror to a cold, contained fury that was somehow more frightening than shouting would have been. You are not the first. He read aloud very quietly. The others didn't have anyone. The others, Evelyn whispered. There were others. Other women. Sent for the same way I was. Under a dead man's name. Women with nobody to come looking. She grabbed his arm. Caleb, where are they? Where are the other women? Caleb Dawson looked down the street toward the little burying ground, toward the land office, toward everything he'd spent a year half knowing and refusing to fully know. I think, he said, and his voice was barely a whisper, I think that's the question Booth has been killing people to keep folks from asking. They rode back to Caleb's ranch fast, and neither one of them spoke until the house was in sight. And then Evelyn said the thing that had been building in her the whole ride. I'm not running. Evelyn, don't. She turned in the saddle to look at him. Ruth said run, and I understand why she said it, and I don't blame her, and if it were just me, if it were just my own neck, maybe I would. But it isn't just me. There are other women, Caleb. Women who got the same letters. Women who crossed the same country with the same hope in a trunk. And most of them going by that note are dead. And there is a girl named Ruth being made to write love letters at gunpoint so the next one keeps coming. I am not going to get on a stage and ride away and leave all of that behind me and call it survival. I did that once already this year. I ran from my whole life and called it a fresh start. I'm done running toward the next thing. This time, I'm standing still and dealing with the thing that's in front of me. Caleb reined in. He looked at her for a long time. You understand what you're saying? He said. You understand you're saying you want to go up against a man who's already killed to protect this with nothing but a forged letter and a scared girl's note and a rancher nobody in town takes serious. I understand exactly what I'm saying. He'll come for you. Then let him come for me while I'm looking right at him instead of catching me alone at a gate. At least this way, I get to choose the ground. Caleb Dawson was quiet. And then slowly something in his face shifted some door that had been closed for 3 winters, cracking open a hair. When he spoke, his voice was rough. My wife would have said the exact same thing, he said. Word for word, Sarah never ran from anything in her life. It's half of what killed her. She wouldn't leave when the fever came through. She stayed and nursed half the county, and she caught it doing it. He looked away. I told myself for 3 years I'd never let another person under my roof because I couldn't stand to lose one more brave woman to this country. And here you are, not a day in the door, telling me you want to run straight at the thing everybody else runs from. I'm sorry, Evelyn said softly, for reminding you. Don't be sorry. He met her eyes. It's the first time in 3 years I've felt anything but empty. Turns out I'd rather be scared than empty. He set his jaw. All right, we do it your way. We don't run. But we're not fools about it either. If we're going up against Booth, we do it smart, and we do it in a way that gets those women justice, and gets Ruth out from under his thumb, and doesn't get either one of us buried in that little plot next to Whitaker. Deal? Deal. Then the first thing we need, Caleb said, is proof. Booth's whole game runs on nobody being able to prove anything. Dead women don't testify. Forged letters burn. A scared girl won't talk if talking gets her killed. So the first thing we do is get our hands on something a judge can't ignore. He thought. The land office, county land and claims. Everything Booth has done, every spread he's grabbed, every dead owner, every forged deed, it's all got to be on paper somewhere in that office. Because the whole point of stealing land legal-like is you've got to file the paper to make it stick. He can hide the bodies. He can't hide the paperwork, or the theft doesn't work. So we get into the land office. So we get into the land office, which is easier said than done on account of it being locked and watched and run by a clerk who answers to Booth. Caleb almost smiled. But I know something Booth doesn't know I know. That clerk, the one runs the land office, he's the girl's father. Evelyn went still. Ruth's father, runs the office, which means Ruth grew up in that office, which means if there's a person alive who knows where every dangerous piece of paper in that building is filed, it's the girl who's already trying to help me. It's the girl who's already risked her life to warn you. Caleb nodded slowly. The question is whether she's brave enough to do it twice. She wrote 3 months of kindness to a stranger with a gun at her back, Evelyn said quietly. I think she's braver than either of us knows. I think she's just been alone with it. Same as I was, same as you were. She looked toward town. She needs the same thing we all needed. Somebody to show up. Somebody who won't ride off from her at a gate. They didn't have to go looking for Ruth. Ruth came to them. It was full dark when the dog started barking, and Caleb was up and at the window with a rifle before Evelyn had even sat up, and then his shoulders dropped, and he set the rifle down and said, "It's the girl. She's alone, and she's hurt." He was out the door before Evelyn got her boots on, and by the time she reached the porch, he was already helping Ruth up the steps, and the girl's lip was split, and there was a bruise coming up dark along her cheekbone, and she was crying and trying not to the way people cry when they've learned that crying gets them hit. He knows. Ruth got out. He knows I gave you the note. Somebody saw me run to you in the street and told him. And he... She touched her split lip and flinched. He did this. And he said if I so much as looked at you again, he'd... She couldn't finish it. You're safe now, Evelyn said, getting an arm around her, walking her inside. You hear me? You're under Caleb Dawson's roof, and there is not a man in this county fool enough to come through that door tonight. You're safe. Sit down. Let me look at that lip. I'm not safe, Ruth sobbed. None of us are safe. You don't understand what he is. You don't understand what he's done. Then tell me, Evelyn said, gently kneeling in front of her, taking the girl's shaking hands in both of hers. Tell me all of it. Every bit. You've been carrying it alone, and it's too heavy to carry alone. I know I've carried heavy things alone too. So set it down, right here, with us. We'll help you carry it. And Ruth looked at her, this stranger, this woman she'd only ever known as words on paper, words she herself had written under threat and somehow meant anyway. And something in her broke open the way a dam breaks all at once and all the way. There were 4, she whispered, before you, 4 women. He'd have me write them, get them out here, get them alone, and then... Her whole body shook, and then they'd be gone. He'd say they'd moved on, gone back east, run off. And everybody believed it, because who's going to come looking for a woman with no family that nobody knew was here? But they didn't move on Miss Carter. I know they didn't, because I saw... She stopped, gasping. What did you see? Caleb said very low. Ruth, what did you see? Ruth looked up at him with her split lip and her bruised face and her 16 years, and she said the thing that changed everything. I saw him bury the deeds, she said. All of them. Every forged deed, every fake will, every letter he made me write. He keeps them. He doesn't burn them. That's the thing. Nobody would guess he keeps them buried in a strongbox, because he says paper's the only thing that protects a man from his partners. He says the day Booth stops being useful to the men above him is the day that box keeps him breathing. Her voice dropped to nothing. I know where the box is. I watched him bury it. I'm the only living soul besides Booth who knows where every piece of proof in this whole county is hidden. The room went dead silent. Ruth, Evelyn said slowly, carefully, the way you'd talk to someone standing on a ledge. Do you understand what you just told us? I understand. I just told you the thing that gets me killed, Ruth whispered. The thing I've been too scared to tell anyone for a year. Because the second Booth knows, I told I'm the 5th woman nobody comes looking for. No, Caleb said. And he crossed the room and crouched down in front of the girl, and Evelyn saw in his face the thing that had opened up in him, the thing 3 years of grief had frozen over, and one stubborn abandoned bride had cracked back open. No. You listen to me. You are not the fifth anything. You told 2 people tonight who are not going to let anything happen to you, and I've buried enough brave women in this county to last me the rest of my life, and I am done. You hear me? I'm done digging holes for people who deserved better. Nobody's putting you in the ground. Nobody's putting Evelyn in the ground. We are going to dig up that box, and we are going to walk it into the hands of a judge who doesn't answer to Harlan Booth, and we are going to hang that man from the highest tree in the territory for what he's done to you and to those 4 women, and to whoever's next. And you're going to be alive to watch it. That's a promise. And I don't make promises. I don't keep ask anybody in this county what Caleb Dawson's word is worth. Ruth stared at him, then at Evelyn. 2 strangers who'd shown up. 2 people who hadn't ridden off. You mean it? She whispered. He means it, Evelyn said. It's the whole reason I trusted him. He's a man who does the thing he says he'll do. It's rare enough out here that it looks almost like a miracle when you finally run into it. Ruth wiped her face with the back of her hand. Something came into her expression that hadn't been there before, something older than 16, something that looked almost like courage finally finding company. Then I'll take you to the box, she said. But it has to be tomorrow night. There's a Booth's leaving town for 2 days, meeting the men above him, the ones I told you about, the ones the box is insurance against. He goes every month. He'll be gone by tomorrow noon and back the next evening. That's the window. That's the only window. If we don't get the box out of the ground while he's gone, then we do it tomorrow night, Caleb said. There's one more thing. Ruth's voice dropped again. The box isn't the only thing he keeps buried out there. She looked between them, and her split lip trembled. I told you the 4 women didn't move on. I told you I know they didn't. She swallowed hard. I know where they are, too. They're out there, near the box. All 4 of them. And if you dig where I tell you to dig tomorrow night? She couldn't finish. She didn't have to. Evelyn reached out and took the girl's hand and held it tight, and felt her own heart pounding like a drum, and understood that everything up to this moment, the gate, the letter, the grave, the whispers, all of it had only been the door. And tomorrow night they were going to open it. They spent the whole next day getting ready, and it was the longest day of Evelyn Carter's life. She'd thought waiting at the gate had been the longest, those hours of standing alone with a letter in her hand, doing the math on $11. But that had been a different kind of long. That had been the long of a woman who'd lost everything. This was the long of a woman who had something now and stood to lose it, and had to sit still with that knowledge from sunup to dark. You keep looking at the window, Caleb said around midday. He was cleaning the rifle at the table, slow and methodical, the way a man does a thing with his hands when his mind needs somewhere to go. Booth's gone. Ruth watched the stage take him herself. He won't be back till tomorrow evening. I know. Then quit watching the road for him. I'm not watching for him. Evelyn turned from the window. I'm watching because the last time I trusted a plan, I ended up at a gate with a canceled arrangement and no way home. So forgive me if I've got a hard time believing a thing's going to go the way somebody tells me it will. Caleb set the rifle down. That's fair, he said. That's more than fair. But I'll tell you the difference between then and now, and you can take it or leave it. Tell me. Then you were trusting a stranger's words on paper. Now you're trusting people you can see with your own eyes standing in the room with you who've shown you what they're willing to risk. He picked the rifle back up. Words on paper lie easy, Evelyn. It's a lot harder to lie standing in front of somebody. Evelyn looked at him a long moment. Ruth lied on paper, she said quietly, for 3 months, and meant every word anyway. Ruth's the exception that proves it. She's the one who put the truth in the lie because she couldn't do anything else. Caleb almost smiled. You want to know the thing that tells me she's straight with us? She showed up here bleeding. A liar doesn't take a beating to sell you a story. A liar rides off clean. He set the rifle aside for good. She's real. The box is real. Tonight's real. And I've got no more intention of dying tonight than you do, so let's spend the daylight we've got making sure we don't.
Jamisad.
Ruth came at dusk on foot, keeping to the low ground, and the bruise on her face had gone the deep purple-yellow of a day-old hurt. Evelyn met her at the door and put an arm around her without a word, and the girl leaned into it for a second, just long enough to be a person who'd been held instead of hit. And then she straightened up and got down to business because there wasn't time for anything else. He's not back till tomorrow evening, Ruth confirmed. But there's a man watches the office at night. Old Pruitt. He drinks. By 10, he'll be dead asleep in the back with a bottle he always is. That's the one bit of luck we get. The box isn't at the office anyway. It's out past the old Whitaker place in the draw, where the cottonwoods are. That's where Booth buries things he doesn't want found. Her voice tightened. That's where all of it is. How far? Caleb asked. Hour's ride. Maybe less if we push. And you're sure of the spot? Ruth looked at him, and there was something terrible in her young face. I'm sure of the spot, she said. I helped him dig 2 of the graves. He made me. He said if I ever told, I'd be in the 3rd. I know exactly where they are. I'll know that ground the rest of my life whether I want to or not. The room went quiet. Ruth, Evelyn said softly, you don't have to be the one who digs tonight. You show us the spot, and then you sit with me and Caleb does the digging. You've done your part. You've done more than your part. You don't have to put your hands back in that dirt. Yes, I do, Ruth said, and her voice cracked, but it didn't fold. Those women died because I wrote the letters that brought them out here. I know it wasn't my choice. I know I was a girl with a gun at my back. But they came because of words in my hand, Miss Carter. And if I'm going to live the rest of my life knowing that, then I'm going to be the one who digs them up and gives them back their names. That's the only thing that's mine to do. Please don't take it from me. Evelyn looked at Caleb. Caleb looked back at her. And neither of them said no because there are some things you don't have the right to take from a person, even to spare them. All right, Evelyn said gently. All right, we do it together. All 3 of us. They rode out under a moon just past full and nobody spoke, and the only sounds were the horses and the wind, and underneath it all the hammering of 3 hearts that all knew what they were riding toward. The draw was where Ruth said it would be a low fold in the land, where a stand of cottonwoods marked a seep of water, and the ground stayed soft. Caleb reined in at the top of it, and sat for a moment, taking it in, and Evelyn saw his hand tighten on the rifle. This is it, Ruth whispered. The box is under the biggest tree, the one that leans, 3 feet down, wrapped in oilcloth. The others are further in, past the deadfall. Box first, Caleb said. We came for proof. We get the proof in the ground and out safe. Then we tend to the rest. The box is what hangs Booth. The box is what makes the rest mean something, instead of just being 4 more sad stories nobody can prove. They dug. Caleb worked the spade, and Evelyn cleared the loose dirt with her hands, and Ruth stood watch, turning slow circles, listening to the dark. And they were maybe 2 feet down when the spade struck something that wasn't dirt and wasn't stone. And Caleb went down on his knees and cleared it with his hands, and there it was, oilcloth, wrapped tight, tied with cord, exactly the way a 16-year-old girl said it would be a year after she watched it go into the ground. That's it, Ruth breathed. That's the box. Caleb hauled it up. He cut the cord and peeled back the oilcloth, and inside was a strong box, iron-bound, locked. He didn't waste time trying to pick it. He worked the spade point under the hasp and put his whole weight on it, and the old lock gave with a shriek of tearing metal, and the lid came up, and the 3 of them looked inside by moonlight. It was all there. Deeds, a thick sheaf of them, each one for a spread, whose owner had died and left no clear heir. Each one signed over to a company Evelyn had never heard of in handwriting that didn't match any dead man's hand. Forged wills. A ledger, close-written page after page of names and dates and dollar amounts. And letters. Bundles of letters tied in string 4 bundles. And Ruth made a sound when she saw them, a small broken sound, because she knew that handwriting too. It was her own. The other women, Evelyn said. Those are their letters, the ones you wrote them. He kept them, Ruth whispered. He kept everything, even the letters. Why would he keep the letters? Because they prove the women existed, Caleb said grimly, lifting the ledger, tilting it to the moon. And a man like Booth keeps proof of everything because proof is what he holds over the men above him. He can't blackmail his partners with a story. He needs the paper. He turned a page, turned another, and went very still. Evelyn. What? The names in this ledger. His voice had changed. The men Booth answers to. The ones the box is insurance against. He looked up, and his face in the moonlight was the face of a man who's just found the bottom drop out of a floor he thought was solid. It's not some outfit back east. It's not strangers. Evelyn, one of these names. He didn't get to finish, because that was when Pruitt old drunk. Pruitt, who was supposed to be asleep in the back of the land office with a bottle an hour's ride away, stepped out from behind the leaning cottonwood with a scattergun leveled at Caleb's chest and said, "Set the box down, Dawson. Slow, and get your hands where I can see 'em." Everything stopped. "Pruitt," Caleb said very carefully, not moving. "You don't want to do this." "I surely don't," Pruitt said, and he sounded like he meant it, and his hands were shaking on the scattergun. "I truly don't, Caleb. But Booth pays me, and Booth's got a longer reach than you do, and a man's got to eat." His eyes flicked to Ruth, and something crossed his face that might have been shame. He knew, girl. You understand? He knew you'd try something the minute his back was turned. He didn't get on that stage. He rode out an hour and doubled back and told me to watch the draw, because he figured you'd bring 'em straight here. His voice broke a little. "He's smarter than all of you. I tried to tell you that with my eyes at the office and you didn't listen." "Where is he?" Evelyn said. "He's coming," Pruitt said miserably. "I lit the signal soon as I saw you dig. He's 20 minutes out, maybe less." And that was the twist that turned the whole night over. They hadn't beaten Booth to the box. Booth had let them dig it up. He'd sent word he was leaving so they'd move. He'd wanted the box out of the ground and in the hands of the only 3 people who'd ever tried to cross him, because a box in the ground was a risk, but a box in the hands of people he was about to bury was no risk at all. He'd hand them the shovel and let them dig their own grave next to the one they came to find. He wants it all in one place, Evelyn said slowly, understanding it fully, now feeling the cold of it spread through her. The box, the women, us. He wants everything that could ever hang him gone into one hole in one night, and then there's no loose ends left anywhere in the world. That's why the letters. That's why he kept it all. Not just insurance against his partners. It was bait. "Now you're catching on," said a new voice from the dark. And Harlan Booth rode down into the draw unhurried, that gentleman's smile on his face, with 2 hard-faced men behind him, and the moonlight bright enough to show the pistol resting easy in his hand. "Miss Carter." Booth swung down off his horse like a man arriving at a party. "I did tell you, didn't I? I said things happen to folks out here who don't have people watching out for them. And here you are, in the dark, in a draw. Nobody comes to with a rancher, nobody listens to, and a girl nobody will miss." He shook his head almost fond. "You should have run. Ruth told you to run. I know she did, because I know everything that girl does. I've known everything she's done since she was old enough to hold a pen. You should have listened to her. You killed 4 women, Evelyn said. Her voice was steady. She made it steady. 4 women who crossed a country because they were lonely and hopeful and had nobody. You wrote them love letters, and you buried them in a draw. I didn't write anyone love letters." Booth's smile thinned. That was Ruth. Talented girl. Terrible aim on the loyalty, but a real gift with words. His eyes went to the strongbox open on the ground, gleaming. "And now you've done me the last favor I needed. That box has been a stone in my boot for a year, buried where I couldn't watch it, where anybody might stumble on it. And here you've gone and dug it up nice and clean, and gathered up everyone in the whole territory who's ever caused me a moment's worry, all in one convenient spot. He gestured with the pistol. "Pruitt, get the box." Pruitt didn't move. "Pruitt." "Harlan." Old Pruitt's voice was shaking. You said scare 'em. You said we'd take the box and run 'em out of the county. You didn't say, I said what I needed to say to get you to hold that scattergun." Booth's voice went flat and cold, and for the first time the gentleman was all the way gone. "Now pick up the box, or you can go in the hole with them. Your choice. You've got about 3 seconds to make it." And in the frozen space of those 3 seconds, with Booth's attention on Pruitt, with the 2 hard men watching Pruitt, with everyone's eyes for one single heartbeat, pulled away from her, Evelyn moved. Not toward Booth, toward the ledger. She snatched it up off the ground and pressed it flat against her chest and stood up, and Booth's pistol swung to her instantly, but she was already talking fast in the loud, clear voice she'd used in the general store, the voice that carried. "You want this," she said. "This ledger, with every name in it, including the names of the men you answer to the ones Caleb just read, the ones you don't want spoken out loud, even out here in the dark." She saw it land. She saw Booth's eyes flick just for an instant to the 2 men behind him, and she understood she'd found the exact seam in the thing. "You've got a problem, Mr. Booth, because I've read it now. Caleb's read it. Ruth's known it for a year. You can put 3 of us in a hole tonight, sure, but you can't put the knowing in a hole. And the men in this ledger, the men above you, how do you think they'll feel when they hear that Harlan Booth let their names get read out loud by an Ohio seamstress in a draw full of witnesses? Do you think a man who's that careless with the paper gets to stay useful very long?" Booth's smile was gone completely now. "Give me the ledger," he said. "I don't think I will." "You are standing in front of 4 graves, woman, telling a man with a gun, no." "I've been standing in front of graves my whole life," Evelyn said. "My mother's, my father's, a grave with Thomas Whitaker's name on it that you salted the earth over so you could sell his land. I'm not scared of graves, Mr. Booth. I'm scared of dying without meaning, and that you can't do to me because I've already made this mean something. Ruth's father runs your land office. He's the county clerk. And the moment I said your partner's names in front of witnesses, I made sure this doesn't die with me." She had no idea if that was true. She said it like iron. "So go ahead, shoot, and spend the rest of your short life wondering who I told before I came out here tonight." It was a bluff. It was the biggest bluff of her life, built entirely out of nerve, and the hope that a man who trades in fear could be made to feel it. And it worked for exactly as long as it took Booth to weigh it. She watched him do the math, the way she'd watched 100 men do math. Watched the cold calculation behind his eyes. Watched him decide whether one Ohio woman with a bluff could really reach the men above him. And then she watched him decide she couldn't. "You're lying," Booth said softly. "You came straight from the gate to Dawson's ranch to here. You didn't tell anyone anything. There wasn't time." He raised the pistol. "Nice try, though. You'd have made a fine card player." His finger tightened. "Goodbye, miss." The shot cracked across the draw, but it didn't come from Booth's pistol. It came from behind him. From the dark past the deadfall, and one of Booth's 2 hard men dropped his rifle and grabbed his shoulder and swore. And Booth spun around, and out of the shadows, where 4 women lay buried, stepped a line of men on horseback with rifles up, and a star of tin catching the moonlight on the lead rider's chest. "Harlan Booth," the lead rider called out. "This is U.S. Marshal deputies. Drop the weapon and stand where you are." And Evelyn Carter, still clutching the ledger to her chest, still standing in front of 4 graves, felt her knees nearly go out from under her because she understood all at once that somebody had known. Somebody had told the law. And there was only one person who could have. She turned and looked at Ruth. And Ruth, 16 years old, bruised and shaking, met her eyes and said so quiet only Evelyn could hear it. "My father mailed the letter 3 days ago to a marshal 2 counties over, one Booth doesn't own." Tears were running down her face. "I told him I'd finally found somebody who wouldn't run, and he said if that was true, if somebody was really going to stand, then it was time he stopped being a coward too. She was crying openly now. You did that, Miss Carter. You showing up and not running. It's the reason my father found his spine after a year of losing it. You saved us before you ever dug a single shovel of dirt. It didn't end clean. Nothing ever ends clean. Booth didn't surrender. A man with a ledger full of hanging offenses doesn't surrender. He ran, and there was shooting in the dark. And for a few terrible seconds, Evelyn couldn't find Caleb, and her heart stopped dead in her chest. And then his hand closed around her arm and pulled her down behind the strongbox and covered her with his own body while the deputies did their work. And when it was over, Booth was face down in the very draw where he'd buried 4 women, brought down trying to reach a horse that would have carried him to the men whose names he'd been so careful never to say out loud. And the ledger stayed in Evelyn's hands the whole time. She never let it go. Not once. When the shooting stopped and the deputies were binding up the wounded, and Pruitt was sitting on the ground with his head in his hands, weeping. The weeping of a man who'd picked the right side 1 heartbeat before it was too late. The lead marshal came over to Evelyn and held out his hand for the book. She looked at it. She looked at him, at the star on his chest, at his face, which she couldn't read the way she could read other men's because he wasn't from here and didn't have the same tells. How do I know, she said, that your name's not in it too? The marshal went still. Then slowly he nodded like it was a fair question, like it was the exact right question, like he respected her more for asking it. You don't, he said. Not for certain. So here's what we'll do. You don't hand it to me. You hand it to the girl's father, the county clerk, in the daylight, in front of the whole town, and he reads every name in it out loud, where nobody can bury it after, including mine if mine's in there. That way it doesn't matter whether you trust me. The trusting's out of it. Truth read out loud in the open doesn't need anybody to be honest anymore. He almost smiled. Miss, I've been chasing the men above Booth for 2 years and never got close enough to touch them. You just handed me the one thing I never could get. So no, I'm not going to ask you to trust me. I'm going to earn it. Fair. Evelyn Carter looked down at the ledger in her hands. The ledger she'd snatched off the ground in the 1 heartbeat. Nobody was watching the ledger. She'd bluffed her own life against the ledger that held the names of 4 dead women and the men who ordered them dead. Then she looked at Caleb standing beside her. Dust on him and blood, not his own, on his sleeve, and something in his eyes she hadn't seen on any man's face in a long, long time. Something that looked like a man watching a woman he'd stopped being able to imagine his life without. And she looked at Ruth, 16, and free for the first time in a year, free. Fair, Evelyn said, and she closed the ledger and held it against her chest and turned her back on 4 graves that were finally going to give up their names, and started the long walk up out of the draw toward the daylight that was still hours off but coming. It was always coming. That was the thing. Nobody had been able to make her stop believing. Not the fever, not the gate, not the letter, not the gun. The daylight was always coming. You just had to be standing when it got there. The reading of the ledger happened 3 days later, and the whole county came. They came because word had traveled the way it does out there, faster than any stage, faster than any telegraph mouth to mouth across 100 miles of ranch land, that Harlan Booth was dead in the ground. And there was a book that named the men who'd stood behind him, and that an Ohio woman nobody had heard of a week ago was going to see to it that every name got read out loud in the open where nobody could bury it. Ruth's father stood on the steps of the church that doubled as the schoolhouse, and his hands shook when he opened the ledger, and Evelyn stood on one side of him, and Caleb on the other, and Ruth stood in front with her chin up and her bruise fading, and the county clerk who'd been a coward for a year read every single name. He read them slow, he read them clear. He read them so a child at the back could have written them down. And when he came to a name that made the crowd gasp, the name of a territorial land commissioner, a man who'd shaken hands with half the people standing there, he did not skip it. He read it louder. Because Evelyn had told him the night before quiet in his own kitchen. The ones that hurt to read are the ones that matter. Skip a name and you've undone the whole thing. Read the ones that scare you loudest of all. That's the one, a man near the front called out, shaking. That commissioner, he's the one signed off on my brother's land after my brother died. Said the paper was in order. Said there was nothing to be done." His voice broke. There was something to be done. It was stolen. My brother's land was stolen, and that man signed the paper. And another voice further back. My cousin, same. Died of the fever, they said, and the land went to a company nobody ever heard of before the ground was even settled over him. And another. And another. The draw where 4 women had been buried was not the only place Booth and the men above him had planted their crop of dead. The whole county, it turned out, had been quietly bled for 2 years, a spread here, a spread there always, after a death, always with paper that was somehow in order, always signed off by men with clean hands and good names. They'd all known something was wrong. Every one of them had felt it. And every one of them had been alone with the feeling the way Evelyn had been alone at the gate, the way Caleb had been alone with his grief, the way Ruth had been alone with what she'd seen. Until somebody stood. It didn't fix everything at once. That's not how it works, and Evelyn would have distrusted it if it had. The commissioner had reach and money and men in the territorial capital who did not want that ledger to mean what it meant. For a few weeks, it looked like it might slip, like the paper might get lost, like witnesses might be paid to forget, like the whole thing might sink back into the mud, the way such things usually do. And that was when Evelyn Carter did the thing that made her name travel past the county line. She'd kept a copy of the whole ledger. Every name, every date, every dollar. She'd sat up 3 nights running by lamplight and copied it out in her own hand, her careful, plain, honest hand. And she'd made not 1 copy, but 4. And she'd sent them by 4 different writers on 4 different days to 4 different places, to a newspaper in the territorial capital, to a newspaper, 2 territories over to a federal judge. The marshal swore wasn't owned, and to the marshal himself. You can't burn a thing that's in 4 places, she said when Caleb found her sealing the last one. Booth taught me that. He kept everything because paper was the only thing that protected him. Well, paper can protect the other side too. It doesn't care whose hand holds it. It just tells the truth to whoever reads it next. Caleb looked at her a long moment. You copied the whole ledger, by hand, 4 times, in 3 nights. I did. You could have been killed for having it once, and you made 4 more. That's exactly why I made 4 more. Evelyn set down the pen. 1 copy is a thing a man can chase down and destroy, and then he's chasing me. And then I'm the loose end. 4 copies in 4 directions isn't a thing anybody can chase. 4 copies means killing me stops being worth it because I'm not the danger anymore. The danger's already gone out into the world past where anybody can call it back. The safest I've ever been in my life is right now tonight, with those 4 letters sealed on the table. Because now I'm not worth the trouble. She almost smiled. A hard life teaches you strange arithmetic, Caleb. It teaches you that sometimes the way to be safe is to make yourself not worth the killing. Caleb Dawson shook his head slowly, and there was something in his face that had been growing there for weeks, something he'd stopped trying to hide. Sarah was the smartest person I ever knew, he said quietly. I thought I'd never meet her equal. I made my peace with that. Figured a man gets one if he's lucky, and I'd had mine. He looked at her. I was wrong about that too. Turns out a man can be lucky twice. Turns out he can be so lucky it scares him. Evelyn went still. Caleb, I'm not asking anything, he said quickly, the words coming out rough, a man saying a thing he'd rehearsed and still couldn't quite manage. I know how you came here. I know a dead man's forged promise is the reason you're standing in my kitchen, and I'd sooner cut off my own hand than be one more man pressing a lonely woman towards something she didn't choose. So I'm not asking. I'm telling you a true thing, because you taught me that true things ought to be said out loud in the open, where they can't get buried. And the true thing is this. The house was dead for 3 years before you walked into it, and it isn't anymore. And I know the reason why, and the reason has a name, and it's yours. The room was quiet. Evelyn stood there with 4 sealed letters on the table between them, and felt her whole heart moving in her chest, and understood that this was the most dangerous moment of the entire ordeal. More dangerous than the gate. More dangerous than the draw. More dangerous than the ledger. Because everything up to now she'd faced with her guard up, and this was asking her to put it down. "I want to tell you something," she said slowly, "and I need you to let me get all the way to the end of it before you say anything back." "All right." "When I stood at that gate," Evelyn said, "with the letter in my hand and the stage disappearing and $11 to my name, I made myself a promise. I promised I would never again let a man's words decide my life. Never again would I cross a country or a room or so much as a doorway because some man wrote me something pretty. I promised myself that whatever I did next, I would do it with my eyes open, standing on my own ground choosing." She took a breath. "So I can't answer what you just said with my heart, Caleb. My heart's not to be trusted. My heart's the fool that got on a stage for Thomas Whitaker. I have to answer it with my eyes open. Do you understand?" "I understand." His voice was steady, but she could see what it cost him. "Take all the time you—" "I'm not finished." She stepped closer. "I've had my eyes open for weeks now. Wide open. I've watched you give me your own room and hand me the key, and never once ask for it back. I've watched you dig graves for women you never met because it was the decent thing. I've watched you take a bruised girl in and promise her in front of God that nobody would put her in the ground, and then keep the promise. I've watched you, Caleb Dawson, the way I learned to watch men so they couldn't hurt me. And do you know what I found?" "What?" he said barely. "I found there's nothing to catch." Her voice cracked, and she let it. "I kept watching and watching, waiting to find the seam, the lie, the thing under the thing. Because there's always a thing under the thing. I've never in my life met a man where there wasn't. And with you, there just isn't. What you show is what's there. It goes all the way down." Tears were coming now, and she didn't fight them. "You are the first honest man I have ever known, and I did not cross a country for you. I did not get on a stage for a pretty letter you wrote. I chose you standing right here on my own 2 feet with my eyes wide open, knowing exactly who you are. Which means it's the first real choice I've ever gotten to make. And I choose you. Not because I need you. Not because I've got nowhere else to go. I could go anywhere now. I've got a name, I've got respect. I copied a ledger 4 times and half the territory knows it. I don't need saving. I choose you because I want to. And that's the difference. That's the whole difference in the world." Caleb Dawson, who had not cried at his own wife's grave because grief had frozen him too solid for tears, put his face in his hands and wept. And Evelyn crossed the last of the distance between them and put her arms around him and held him the way she'd held Ruth, the way somebody should have held her at the gate. And neither of them said anything for a long while, because there wasn't anything left that needed saying. They were married in the fall in the same church where the ledger had been read, and the whole county came to that too, but for a different reason this time. They came because Evelyn Carter had become in the space of 1 summer something the county had needed and hadn't had someone who'd stood. The people who'd whispered about the abandoned bride in the general store were the same people who now brought her preserves and mended fence with her and asked her advice on their own troubles with the paper, because it turned out a woman who could copy a ledger 4 times and outbluff a killer in a dark draw was exactly the person you wanted looking over a deed you weren't sure of. And there was one more thing that brought them, though nobody said it out loud. Guilt. The good kind. The kind that changes people. Every family in that county had felt something wrong for 2 years and stayed quiet. Every one of them had watched a neighbor die and the land go strange and told themselves it wasn't their business. And then a stranger woman with no reason to care about any of them had refused to stay quiet. And it had cost her nearly her life, and it had cost Ruth a beating, and it had freed the whole county from something that had been strangling it in the dark. They came to the wedding to say a thing they didn't have words for. They came to say thank you, and I'm sorry, and you did what we should have done ourselves all at once. The only way people out there know how to say such things by showing up in their good clothes with their preserves and their fiddles and their whole families to stand witness. Ruth stood up with Evelyn as she was married. 16 years old, straight-backed, heeled. Her father gave the bride away because Evelyn had no father of her own to do it, and because the county clerk had asked for the honor with his hat in his hands, saying, "You gave me back something I'd lost, Miss Carter. My daughter got her courage from watching you. I'd be proud to walk you down if you'd have me. It'd be a way of thanking you I couldn't manage with words." And Evelyn, who had lost her own father to a fever 1,000 miles east and a lifetime ago, took the arm of a man who'd found his spine too late, and then found it in time, and let him walk her to Caleb Dawson. But there was one more piece of it, and it came the week before the wedding, and it was the piece that made the whole thing complete. A rider came up from the territorial capital with a document, and Evelyn's hands shook when she read it, because it was the last thing she'd expected, and the thing she'd wanted most without ever letting herself hope for it. The land. Thomas Whitaker's land, the ranch with the locked gate where she'd stood abandoned in the dust, had been stolen. Everyone knew that now. It had been signed over on forged paper to a company that existed only to hold stolen ground for the men above Booth. And when the ledger did its work and the courts began the long, slow business of unwinding 2 years of theft, a question came up that nobody had a clean answer to. Who did the Whitaker land belong to now? Thomas Whitaker had died with no wife, no children, no living kin anyone could find. That was why Booth had picked him a man nobody would come looking for a clean piece of land to steal. But there was, it turned out, one document in existence that touched the question. A marriage arrangement, filed with the county, between Thomas Whitaker and one Evelyn Carter of Ohio. It was forged, of course. Whitaker had been a year dead when it was filed. But it had been filed in good faith by Evelyn, who had crossed a country believing it was real, who had spent her own money and her own hope on the strength of it, who was the one true victim the whole scheme had actually produced a paper trail for. The court's ruling was strange and narrow, and the writer said likely to be argued over by lawyers for years. But its plain meaning was this: of all the people the Whitaker land might go to, the only one with any documented claim, forged or not made or believed in good faith, the only one who'd been harmed in a way the paper could see, was Evelyn Carter. The land was hers. The very land she'd stood in front of, locked out, thrown away on the worst day of her life. She read the document 4 times. Of course she did. "It's yours," Caleb said quietly, reading it over her shoulder. "The gate, the house, all of it. The ground he abandoned you on. It's yours now, free and clear, or will be when the lawyers finish." Evelyn was quiet for a long moment. "I don't want it," she finally said. Caleb looked at her, surprised. "Evelyn, it's a good spread. Better than mine if we're honest. It's what you came out here for." "I came out here for a home," she said. "Not a spread. And that ground isn't a home. That ground is where I stood and did the math on $11 and thought I was going to die at a gate." She shook her head slowly. "No, I don't want to live where I was thrown away. But I don't want it to sit empty, either dead like it's been. Land that's been used to hurt people ought to be used to help them instead. That's the only thing that scrubs it clean." "So what do you want to do with it?" Evelyn looked up at him, and her eyes were bright. "Ruth wrote 4 women out here," she said. 4 women who came because they were alone and had nowhere and nobody. Booth picked them for exactly that, because nobody would come looking. Because being alone made them safe to hurt. Her voice steadied into something like iron. "I want the Whitaker land to be the place where a woman alone in this country has somewhere to go. A woman who's been widowed, or thrown away, or come west on a promise that turned out to be a lie. I want it to be the one place where being alone doesn't mean being prey. Where a woman with nothing but a trunk and $11 can stand at a gate and this time have it open." Caleb Dawson looked at her for a long, long time. "You want to take the exact ground where the worst thing happened to you," he said slowly, "and turn it into the thing that keeps it from happening to anybody else." "Yes, that's—" He stopped. Started again. "Sarah would have loved you," he said, and his voice broke on it, and he didn't try to hide that anymore either. "She truly would have. She'd have looked at you and known right off you were worth 10 of most people, me included. She'd have handed you a shovel and said, 'Let's get to work.' "Then let's get to work," Evelyn said. And Ruth, who was standing in the doorway and had heard the whole thing, came across the room and took Evelyn's hand. And the three of them stood there together. The thrown-away bride, the honest rancher, and the girl who'd written love letters at gunpoint and lived to be free of it. Three people who'd each been alone with something too heavy to carry and had finally, against every hard lesson their hard lives had taught them, set the weight down together. "The first one who comes to that gate," Ruth said quietly. "I want to be the one who opens it. I want to be the one who tells her she's not alone. Because somebody did that for me, and I've been trying to figure out how to pass it on ever since, and now I know how." "Then it's yours," Evelyn said. "The gate is yours to open." Outside, the whole county was already gathering for a wedding that was really a kind of Thanksgiving, and the light was long and gold across land that had cost so much and was finally starting to give something back. And Evelyn Carter, who had arrived alone with a trunk and a dress she'd never wear, and a promise written by a dead man's forger, stood in a warm house that had been dead 3 years and was not dead anymore, between a man who'd chosen her and a girl who'd been saved by her, and understood that she had gotten in the end the one thing she'd crossed a whole country to find. Not the thing in the letters. Something the letters had never even known how to promise. She'd found where she belonged. The first woman came to the gate in the spring, and it was Ruth who opened it. Her name was Cora, and she'd come west on a promise much like Evelyn's, a widower in need of a wife. Letters full of a future. A stage ticket bought with the last of a dead husband's money. And like Evelyn's, the promise had been a lie, though a smaller and stupider one. The man had simply changed his mind and not bothered to write, and Cora had arrived to find a house with another woman already in it, and a man who wouldn't come to the door. She'd been sitting outside the stage office for 2 days, out of money, out of hope, doing the arithmetic that a woman alone in that country learns to do when someone told her there was a place. A ranch out past the old Whitaker gate, where a woman alone could go and not be prey. She almost didn't believe it. A place like that didn't exist. She'd learned that much about the world, but she went because she had nowhere else, and Ruth met her at the gate, the same gate where Evelyn had stood thrown away 2 years before, and opened it wide and said the words she'd been waiting all that time to say to somebody. "You're not alone," Ruth told her. "Whatever brought you here, whatever they did to you, whatever you're doing the math on right now in your head, you can stop. You're not alone anymore. Come inside. There's food. There's a room with a door that locks from the inside and a key that's yours to keep. And nobody here is going to ask you for a single thing you're not ready to give." Cora stood at the open gate and wept because the last kind words she'd heard had been in a letter that turned out to be a lie, and she'd stopped believing kind words could be anything else. "Why?" she managed. "Why would you do this for a stranger? You don't know me." And Ruth, who had once written that exact kindness into letters at gunpoint, who had learned the hard way what it was worth and what it cost, smiled and gave her the answer that had been handed down to her. "Because somebody did it for me," she said, "and somebody did it for the woman who started this place, and the only way any of us can pay it back is to pass it on to the next one who comes to the gate. That's the whole arrangement. That's the only rent anybody pays here. When you're strong again, and you open the gate for the one who comes after you." Evelyn watched from the porch of the old Whitaker house, which was not dead anymore, which had not been dead for a year. She'd been wrong about not wanting it, or half wrong. She'd been right that she couldn't live where she'd been thrown away. She and Caleb kept their home at his ranch to the north, and that was where their life was. But she'd been wrong to think the Whitaker land could only ever be the place of the worst day of her life. Because she'd stood on this porch 100 times now, watching frightened women come through that gate and walk out months later standing straight, and the ground didn't feel like the worst day anymore. It felt like the best work. "You've got that look," Caleb said, coming up beside her. He'd ridden down with her that morning to mend a stretch of fence, and he'd stood back and let her watch Cora come in, because he'd learned to read her, and he knew what these arrivals did to her. "The one where you're arguing with the version of yourself that stood at this gate. I was thinking she'd have never believed it," Evelyn said. "The woman I was standing here with $11. If you'd told her that in 2 years she'd own this ground and turn it into this, she'd have laughed at you, or cried. She was too tired to know the difference by then. What would you tell her if you could? That woman at the gate. Evelyn was quiet a moment. I'd tell her the thing I kept telling myself and didn't quite believe, she said. That the daylight's always coming. That the worst day isn't the last day unless you decide to lie down in it. She watched Ruth walking Cora toward the house, an arm around her shoulders. And I'd tell her the thing I didn't know yet. That the day you think you lost everything sometimes, that's the exact day you started finding it. You just can't see it standing in the dust because the finding looks like losing right up until it doesn't. Cowboy. They came all that year and the next. Not a flood. The country was too big and word too slow for a flood, but a steady handful. Widows. Thrown-away brides. Women who'd fled something back east and had no name for what they were running from except that they couldn't stay. Some stayed a season and moved on stronger. Some stayed and made lives, married local men, or didn't started their own small spreads. With a stake, the place helped them raise. One or two stayed for good and became like Ruth, the ones who opened the gate, and the county, which had once whispered about the abandoned bride in the general store, came to speak of the Whitaker place with a kind of quiet pride, as though its existence said something good about all of them, which in a way it did, because it had been built on their guilt as much as Evelyn's stubbornness, and they knew it, and they'd chosen to let the guilt make them better instead of bitter. Men who'd stayed silent while their neighbor's land was stolen now hauled lumber out to the Whitaker place for free and asked no thanks. Women who'd have crossed the street from a thrown-away bride now taught the new arrivals to can and quilt and stand up in a country that ate the soft alive. The whole county had been alone with its shame, the way each of them had been alone with their sorrows. And a stranger woman had shown them that the cure for being alone with a thing was to stop being alone. It was the simplest lesson in the world, and the hardest to learn, and Evelyn Carter had taught it to 100 square miles of hard people by the plain force of refusing to run. The commissioner was hanged in the fall of the second year. It took that long, the lawyers, the appeals, the reach of a powerful man clawing at every rope thrown around him. But the ledger was in 4 places and could not be unwritten, and the newspapers Evelyn had mailed it to had printed the names, and once a thing is printed and read by 10,000 people, it stops being something a powerful man can make disappear. One by one, the men above Booth were pulled down into the daylight, and one by one, the daylight did to them what it does. Evelyn didn't go to the hanging. Some in the county were surprised she'd earned the right, they said, more than anyone. The land he'd helped steal, the women he'd helped bury, the beating Ruth had taken all of it traced back to that man's clean signature on dirty paper. But she stayed home. I don't need to watch a man die to know it's over, she told Caleb. I did the thing that mattered. I copied the ledger 4 times by lamplight, and I put the truth where nobody could bury it. The rope's just the law catching up to what the truth already decided. I don't need to see it. I've seen enough men in holes in the ground to last me. What she did instead, the day of the hanging, was go out to the little burying ground where 4 women had lain nameless in a draw, and where they lay now with stones over them and their real names carved deep. Ruth's father had spent a month tracking those names down through the letters in Booth's own strongbox. The letters he'd made his daughter write turned at last into the thing that gave 4 dead women back their identities. Each stone had a name now. Each name had a hometown carved beneath it, so that if kin ever came looking, and some had drawn by the newspapers weeping over graves they'd spent years believing were somewhere else, they'd find their sister, their daughter, their cousin, and know at last what had become of her. Evelyn stood among the 4 stones on the day the last man who'd ordered them into the ground swung for it, and she didn't weep because she'd done her weeping. And this was past weeping now. It's finished, she said to them, to the 4 of them, to the women whose letters she'd read, whose kindness Ruth had poured onto paper, who'd crossed a country on the same hope she had, and hadn't been as lucky. Every one of them, all the way to the top. You're not a story anybody can bury anymore. You've got your names back, and the men who took them are in the ground themselves. And there's a place now, the very place they lured you to, where the next woman who comes gets a locked door and a warm meal instead of a shovel. I couldn't save you. I came too late for that, but I could make sure you were the last." Her voice held steady. "You were the last. I promise you that. You were the last." Years passed the way years do out there, in seasons of drought, and plenty of hard winters and good springs. Evelyn and Caleb grew older on the ranch to the north, and the house that had been dead 3 years when she walked into it filled up with a whole life with children in time. 2 of them, a boy and a girl, who grew up thinking the strangest thing in the world was that anybody would ever be turned away from a gate because they'd never once in their lives seen it happen. Ruth grew up, too, into a woman who ran the Whitaker place with a straight back and a soft heart and an unbendable spine, and who married a man from the next county over who'd first come to her attention because he hauled lumber out to the place for 3 years and never once asked for a word of thanks. Her father grew old and proud and died in his bed, forgiven a man who'd been a coward once and then found his courage in time to matter, which is more than most cowards manage. And the story of it all spread far past the county, past the territory, the way such stories do, carried by the women who'd passed through that gate and gone on to their own lives, told to their own children, worn smooth in the telling until it became something almost like a legend out there. The thrown-away bride who wouldn't run, the cowboy who opened his door, the girl who wrote love letters at gunpoint and lived to open a gate of her own. But the people who'd been there knew the truth was both smaller and larger than the legend. Smaller because there'd been no magic in it. Just a woman too stubborn to lie down in the worst day of her life. Just a man honest all the way down. Just a girl brave enough to tell the truth twice. Just a county that chose in the end to let its shame make it better. Ordinary people, all of them doing the next right thing when the next right thing was hard and cost something. And larger because that plain, unmagical, costly decency turned out to be the thing that changed everything. It saved a girl. It freed a county. It gave 4 dead women their names. It built a place where being alone stopped meaning being prey. It did more good than all the money and all the fine names and all the beautiful lying letters in the world had ever done, and it did it with nothing but nerve and a lamp and a ledger copied 4 times by hand. When Evelyn Carter was an old woman, gray-haired and slow-moving, but with eyes that had never once gone soft, a young reporter came out from back east to write down her story before it was lost. He'd heard the legend. He wanted the truth. He asked her a great many questions, and she answered them plainly, and near the end, he asked her the one everybody always asked, the one she'd answered so many times. The words came easy. "Mrs. Dawson," he said, "how did you survive it, being abandoned like that at a gate in the middle of nowhere with nothing? Most people wouldn't have. How did you?" And Evelyn Carter looked out toward the gate, the old Whitaker gate still standing still, opening still tended now by a woman Ruth had trained who'd once come through it, broken herself, and she gave the answer she'd given 100 times, because it was true, 100 times over. "Young man, everyone asks me how I survived losing everything at that gate," she said. "And for years I let them ask it that way because I didn't know how to explain that they had the question backward." She turned and looked at him, and her old eyes were bright and hard and certain. "I didn't lose everything at that gate. I know that's how it looked. A woman thrown away 1,000 miles from home with $11 and a wedding dress she'd never wear. I know that's the story, but it's wrong. Because I didn't know yet, standing there in the dust doing my arithmetic, thinking my life was over, I didn't know that a rider was coming up the North Trail. I didn't know that the man who'd throw me away had done me the one true kindness of his sorry life by clearing the way for the man who never would. I thought that gate was the end of everything I had." She smiled then, the slow smile of someone who has lived long enough to know exactly how a story turns out. "It was the beginning of everything I am." She was quiet a moment. Outside somewhere, a gate swung open on its hinges, and a woman who'd arrived with nothing was welcomed in by a woman who'd once arrived the same way, and the whole unbroken chain of it stretched back through the years to a summer afternoon and a folded letter in a trembling hand. "So don't ask me how I survived being left behind," Evelyn Carter said, and her voice was iron and it was final, and it closed the story like a door pulled shut against the wind. The one who's left behind isn't always the one who loses. Sometimes she's the one who was set free to go find where she truly belonged and then held that gate open for every woman who came after for the rest of her natural life. I was not thrown away at that gate. I was delivered to my whole life, and I would not trade 1 hour of it, not one, to have been the bride he actually wanted.